Good morning, everybody. I'll tell you, if I had a choice, I would also be standing at the coffee stand. It's very nice to be here with you today, between so many good friends and acquaintances. And it's been a pleasure to be invited to this conference. So the work with Zaha Hadid Architects started several years ago when we started experimenting with different buildings, different building typologies to try to understand how we can take architecture a step further. And now, fast forward 20 years later, we have been deeply, let's say, engaged in the Middle Eastern market, and especially with our engagement in Saudi, we have had a chance to develop some interesting buildings that are a testament of our ethos and also the continuous endeavor and collaboration with our clients to develop a culture of excellence, but also a culture of recognizing how the different planetary regions, the different environments of the world demand different approaches for how we as architects, as developers, as clients operate. Our buildings have been certified by important accreditation, sustainability organizations. But for us, these projects have been learnings and journeys of discovery. And of course, it's easier, I would say, to build horizontal projects, lower level master plans, where sustainability is the key driver. But what happens with high-rise buildings? What are the design approaches that can make high-rise buildings more sustainable? My colleagues were saying, oh, you can't talk about this subject because high-rise buildings will always be unsustainable, too much glass, too much concrete or steel, the structures are too demanding. But let's think about it for a minute. Our approach and some of the let's say the experiments that we're making in different buildings, in this case the Central Bank of Iraq, are looking at an environment whereby a building is placed between the Tigris River and the south-facing sun. And the plan that we had developed is one whereby the building that faces the south side gets clad with an opaque facade that helps insulate it against solar exposure, but opens it up to the Tigris River and gives those beautiful and very semantic views to this archetypal geographical feature. And of course, facades and high-rise buildings don't need to be made of glass all across the world. I think the 20th century paradigm of building generic prototypes of buildings is long gone. And now with advanced computational software, we can begin to discuss how the tower facade can become a filter of the environment. So whether it's orientation, whether it's the interface that is created between the inside and the outside, become a scope of experimentation where we can begin to address a lot of these issues very effectively. And what you can see here on the slide is several options on exactly the same building of how the facade can be, depending on where the sun is coming from, the wind, the views, etc. But in other cases, we have also looked at the aspect of self-shading, densifying buildings, bringing them closer together to create shaded in-between areas, shading the public domain, and therefore in very hot and arid climates to also create a sense of comfort, environmental comfort in the way that people move through these spaces. In other cases, digital simulations help us to begin to address from the beginning the solar orientation, the arrangement of the balconies, and also to begin to cultivate or to generate public courtyards or public areas where the buildings shade themselves. And this particular project was designed with obviously the views to the Arabian Gulf as a primary asset. And because of its north-facing orientation, we managed to get about 85% of all units facing toward the sea with this simple U-shaped diagram that you see. And that's a very, very high number. In other areas, like Shenzhen, the towers can be more glassy, let's say, because the environment is different. It's more rainy, it's more tropical. But in that case, the interchange between solar sunshine and rain is so abrupt and so quick that we had different sets of problems to resolve. In this particular case, we needed to find ways how to diffuse the hot spotting that is created in the concave areas of the glazing of the tower. So to avoid focusing these sort of light beams onto the street, but also begin to examine forms that do not allow for overt concentration of sunlight in any one particular area. Louvering has also been used extensively to be able to address the issue of the southern solar exposure. But also what's happening is that buildings nowadays demand more long-term resilience and future-proofing. And we believe that when it comes especially to workplaces, the deep plan prospect of buildings gives us that extra flexibility and also the extra future-proofing ability to be able to reorganize the companies and the operational aspects of these towers in years to come. But also, quite importantly, we work and live in these offices for the large majority of our lives. So atria are becoming key factors in bringing together public life or work/public life within them. So we've developed a huge repertoire of atria in all of our projects, from low-rise buildings to very high-rise buildings. And these spaces for us are spaces of social interactivity, resilience, navigation, orientation through the building, knowing where you're moving through. No more labyrinthine spaces, no more getting lost in endless Kafkaesque buildings. I don't know if you guys know the author, but he wrote extensively about that. And therefore, these atria become spaces of joy, of expansion, of feeling architecture in its most positive way. And of course, atria not only become these spaces of social interactivity, but they can also begin to frame the external part of the city, the external environment, and to begin to address views, monuments, orientation. So they become very generative devices in the way our buildings are designed. Also, on this slide, in the middle top slide, you can see how ZHA works relentlessly to develop options for its clients so that we can begin to see in a very tangible way what different building forms mean for a particular site and what are the pros and the cons. And whilst it's very difficult to claim that any one building is perfect for a particular site, we can pretty much go through an exploration of enhancement and optimization to try to understand what a very good building could be for a particular site. The idea of my presentation today is really that we can begin to develop better buildings by design. Better buildings by design that looks out at the environment, that looks at its people, that looks at the way that we cooperate as individual stakeholders and entities to be able to discover new ways and new possibilities. The realm of architecture is infinite, and if we have good and positive inspiration, we can achieve incredible things. That has been my experience all of these years. These spaces of social interactivity become spaces where buildings now we begin to talk about buildings that are no longer privately owned entities, but they become part of the city fabric. And as such, we can begin to think about building as public plazas, as spaces of social infrastructure, as spaces of interconnection between buildings. Think about it. Nobody really designs the in-between spaces between buildings. We've never really explored the idea of placemaking through architecture and not only on the ground. And we believe that by multiplying the ground, we can very many times create places that are elevating the street, creating degrees of segregation from the car traffic, but give rise to new plazas, to new places for people to inhabit. And of course, buildings can also become spaces of breakout, gardening spaces, spaces where we can begin to bring in social functions, kindergartens, educational facilities, clinics, and not just monofunctional entities of buildings that are over and over the same. So I think we can begin to hybridize the programming of architecture to achieve more. And I think that pays off for the public, the common good, but also for the clients themselves. So we're beginning to think about networked urbanism, where buildings are not individual entities, but they are networks of buildings as urban and social infrastructure with different functionalities on different levels. The bridges can become new streets or pedestrian streets that allow people to connect within their buildings. And, you know, high-rise buildings is not just about skylines. High-rise buildings is not just about the iconic, about the signal, although they do that very well. But it's also about three-dimensional organisms. We can begin to think futuristic cities are intensively interconnected entities where people and mobility and goods travel together in orchestrated systems, not fully controlled perhaps, but orchestrated systems that allows us to utilize the interconnectivity between the different levels in a very much in a three-dimensional or even a four-dimensional way. And why not begin to think our cities as green and blue technologically driven entities where we look at renewables and we look at greenery and nature, and we begin to create these hybrid cyborg type entities where we cultivate both nature and technology, and we find that fine balance between these two trajectories that oftentimes tend to push in opposite ways. And buildings are not just for living, not just for hospitality. I think we're also looking at workspace ecosystems or habitation ecosystems. We're beginning to look at how we can foster creativity and engagement in the types of spaces that we build. So biophilic design is at the core of what we do. It's not just about greenery and greenwashing, but it's about how to understand these buildings are places where nature can grow inside. And nature, as much as plants are nature, so are humans nature. So we want to see humans thriving in these environments. We've also experimented with communities or ecosystems that are regenerative and almost wholly autonomous from the public grid. In some cases, we're beginning to rethink what buildings that are off-grid mean and what they look like. So developing mini cities that are a cluster and an agglomeration of multifunctional entities that come in with their own set of infrastructures for waste management, water filtering, recycling, and also regenerating the whole flow of energy and materials within them is a very interesting topic, and we hope to create new partnerships to be able to develop these thoughts further. Material sustainability is, of course, one big topic, and I'm not going to get into it today, but suffice to say that there is a lot of waste products that can be used, recycled, sorted out, sifted, and 3D printed to be able to create new building materials that can be used to develop anything from perforated facades to geometrically intricate decorative pieces. And so when we see sand and microsilica, or when we see salt brine, we can begin to think and speculate how these materials can be used as part of the building process, because they can be locally sourced and they can be probably easily transformed and handled in that way. And last but not least, Saudi, for us, for me and my team, has been a very daring engagement with the environment. Not only the Saudi people, who are amazing, courageous, and visionary people in themselves, but also that beautiful environment that we all, as a design industry, have had the chance to learn about. The different types of deserts, the different types of species, the beautiful beaches, the relentlessly hot environment, but also the beautifully cold and snowy environment, for example, on the peaks of Trojena. And I can't talk about this project very much. I'm only showing you a few slides that have been publicly disclosed already, but our Discovery Tower on Jebel Alaus is one of our latest engagements in Saudi, where we're looking at this tower as an observatory, observation tower, that allows us to look at both the mountains, the Red Sea, and the Red Desert in this particular place. So a closing remark: the future is up to us. We can all decide to do better any given day, and we're very grateful to be able to share these thoughts with you today. Thank you.